Thank you for having me. Today I'm going to talk with you about kind of what I do here and some of the lessons learned and how to approach engaged community work. And especially for students, how do you leverage the skills that you've learned in graduate school? Sometimes that can be somewhat nebulous, particularly if you're not going into the academy, or if you just don't quite know yet what you're, what you're interested in. One of the most important parts is, well, I'll get to these things. So I'm just going to give you a quick orientation of where I am. I'm going to talk about the U.S. land grant epistemology. I give you this to understand why I do what I do. Talk a little bit about how basic and applied research work together, and then we'll do some exercises and activities that will help give you some leadership guidance around the portability of your skills and some of the sustainability and growth of your skills in communities. So where is Kansas? Kansas is, I don't want to explore Google Earth. There we go. So there we are. There's Bergen. Kansas is all the way over there. So I'm a long way away, but I will be there quite soon. So, and it's landlocked, in case you couldn't tell. So this is just a bit about me. I did my bachelor's degree at Indiana University in Bloomington. And then I went to Silicon Valley in California for 8 years, worked on gene expression, microarray technologies. I was in technology development there, but I always was really interested in how children came to know what they know and how they learn. So there we go, and I'm working on my MPH, as Zacharias said. So land-grant universities, they're called land grants because in the United States, the government gave land to each state to use to build universities. And the most important component of it are these two elements. So practical education for the industrial classes, recognizing that in the 1860s, we were truly the ivory tower. If you were in college, you were quite privileged, and there was no real engagement. And then the service to communities. So what I do with service to communities is exactly what we'll talk about today. And so I'm going to go through just briefly some of the foundations of what we do and how we come to know what we know. So it's this recursive process of basic research. So basic research, right? You're trying to understand how things work, but you're not necessarily trying to change anything. You're really trying to describe and explain. And you can do some applied research, but that's more in the extension component that I'll get to in a second. So basic research should inform your teaching, right? We all understand that what you read, what you produce is going to inform how you work in the classroom. And finally, extension is the mechanism of applied research. So it's taking what we know in not just the land-grant university, but in all universities, translating that research into practice for the benefit of communities. And that's where that skill portability really comes in, right? These are reciprocal and recursive processes. They're ongoing, and sometimes they go backwards, and sometimes one is more heavily represented than others. That's okay. It's a system, right? So, getting to that basic research, one of the beautiful things is it's always updating what we know, right? The beautiful thing about science is it's never settled. We're always trying to advance. research universities typically focus on that. I talked about teaching, and then that extension work, sometimes it's called outreach and engagement. Extension is somewhat different in that it is intentional and funded positions to go do this, like mine. So one of the best things about extension and how this work happens is that it really is that tie back. So we're always interested in what the next need is, right? And so how do we find that out? Well, we find that out through extension because we're working in communities. And the idea of this part of the cycle is to solve problems at the community level. It's to translate your research into practice to help communities build their capacity and therefore build their resilience. And there are two main areas. So you can do the applied research that helps solve problems, and then you can also do programming, things like parent education, nutrition education, education around adult development and aging. So there are different ways to do it, but I work in applied early childhood education research, and I take a community-based participatory research approach. I imagine you're all familiar with that. But some of the hallmarks, and you're going to hear this from me repeatedly, is that multiple expertise exist. So when you're going to come to a community, you're going to have a really solid and extraordinarily small amount of expertise. Don't be afraid, that's okay. You're going to know a whole lot about a little, right? Which is great, because that's what communities don't know about. But they are experts in themselves. They are, they understand things in their community differently, and I'll address that more fully in a minute. Understanding when you do this, the local context matters. So political, social, and cultural context will make or break how your process goes, and you ignore those things at your own peril. One of the important pieces of this is that when you're engaged in community-based research, you're working directly with stakeholders, and not just that, it is a negotiated process. So you will think about how to meet their needs while also staying true to what it is that you know will be the most important thing that you bring. More on that in a bit, but your goals always revolve around community action and change. That's the idea. That's why we do what we do. So one of the best things about that is, I really I'm a pracademic. I'm going to borrow a term that one of my colleagues there provided me. And there are some of the challenges that, right? It's not really a true experiment. You're rarely doing a randomized controlled trial when you're working on a specific problem for a community. And your outputs are designed for non-academics, right? There are things like reports and presentations that are for community members. They're not at your academic conferences. There are significant ethical concerns that are different, not more or less, just different than when you're doing, research on human subjects. One of the big issues when you work with communities is, by virtue of having your title and your position, there is this inherent hierarchy, right? You are doctor and they are not. And you want to really think about how you can eliminate that. when you're doing engaged community work, you work with communities, you don't work on them. Really important. The other component is there are competing priorities. You know what you bring, you have your expertise, and you also know what good research looks like. However, the community has certain needs that they want, and they might not be interested in some of the things that you feel need to happen in order to achieve their goals. So you have to work together. And if you can flatten that hierarchy, you can work together much more readily. It's uncomfortable at first. I want to be very clear on a lot of this work. It's very uncomfortable. The advantage of this kind of work is that at the end of the day, you are benefiting those community members who have invested their time, money, and talent into the work that you've done. And it may take a while, but you have products and results that are wildly different than those in the basic research realm. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I cannot emphasize enough that this work relies on social networks, and not so much social media networks, but the face-to-face interactions. It's who they know, and that work is the most important component. That you cannot write in from your university and solve anyone's problems. I tried that once. I won't do that again. For what I hope are obvious reasons. And if they're not, I'll explain. So one of the problems is that when you are approached by communities or you talk with communities, sometimes they can be viewed as really high stakes events, like everything's riding on this, right? And if you're going to go do your dissertation research, or you know that a lot hangs in the balance, you can feel this pressure of a high stakes event. So here's the thing: if you approach it like that, that's what it's going to be. If you approach it as an opportunity for a conversation, that's what that will be. Which one do we prefer? That's somewhat of a rhetorical question. I prefer conversations. So do community members. For those faculty that are on today for defenses, it's much more fun when it's just a conversation rather than everything hangs in the balance. And so graduate students, I encourage you to think about that as you go in. Your defenses are opportunities for you to demonstrate what you know and have a conversation about that. So I want to talk a little bit about how I think about this, and I really encourage you. I have a whole host of materials, but I really encourage you to take a look at some of the publications that are in that folder. I have the link on the last page, because there are multiple different tools to help you as you start to embark on these things. So this is my lab. And then the orientation I use is the social organization theory of action and change. It was developed by Mancini and Bowen. That's Jay Mancini on both sides. He is my friend, and that's him in Kansas feeding bison. But more importantly, this box, the social capital, network structure, and community capacity are the things on which I really am focused. So I've mentioned networks. I'm going to keep mentioning networks. But exchanging and reciprocity are the foundations of good working relationships. So I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. It doesn't have to be classic exchange theory, like what's in it for me. That's not it. It's we help each other. We trust each other. Everybody understands what you're going for, the norms, the things that you can do, the things that you probably shouldn't do. Those are shared, and that is really important. And social controls are how groups regulate themselves. And that's really important, that you have a strong orientation towards your social controls, so that everybody's working together and everybody has a shared understanding of what you want to achieve. So I give that so that it's not so cluttered. Then looking at social capital, that includes information, reciprocity, and trust. Trust, as with all things, foundational. You aren't given it, you have to earn it. Part of having your degree will give you some of that positional trust, but you have to demonstrate it. You have to deliver on what you say you're going to do, and you have to also trust the people you're working with to do the same. It's not a top down. It's a flattened hierarchy, and reciprocity, of course, right? You benefit, they benefit. Community capacity is both an important process and an outcome from this kind of work. So as you work with communities, they will start to get better and better and better at performing the actions of community development and engaged research. The coolest part is starting with one and then ongoing support, and again, thinking about transferability, being able to transfer your skills to multiple other domains, and theirs. They will build competence. They will understand what needs to be done for community action. And then finally, there are these informal networks. So, you know, your friends that aren't part of an organization. Then you have formal networks that are your colleagues, maybe your church, your rec league, those kinds of things that have a formal component to them. You're part of an organization. And then the network effect levels really are around understanding the intersection of those formal and informal networks. And that's kind of where the magic happens. So social capital, there are multiple different definitions of it. It really includes these foundational things of information, reciprocity, and trust. With social capital, it increases the likelihood of success. And when you think about social capital, think of it as money, right? It's not money, but we all understand that if you ask for something from someone, that's a cost, right? They have to do something for you. And so you've essentially spent some of your social capital. Now, if they in turn ask you for something, great. They've essentially given you back your social capital, right? So they've spent theirs and gotten to yours. Social capital is a concept that allows for leveraging the resources that you have, but it comes at a cost. But you can build social capital, and that's really important. It's not a zero sum. You can build it and build it and build it. Community capacity is really around that shared responsibility, and this is so critical when you're working with communities. If there is not the sense of buy-in, of shared responsibility at the local level, you're not going to be able to fix that. You can work with them and guide them, but they have to have an understanding that they are there for the general welfare and not their own organizational position. Sometimes that can be tricky. when you're doing really good community capacity building, that collective competence rises, and they're able to then work on multiple different elements after the work that you've done, so that they can continue to improve their communities. This foundational assumption is really critical. It's directed at the community as a whole and at particular elements. So it's not just, yeah, your community is great. It's responds to and anticipates needs, and it's you know, it also targets those things that are acute and really need attention, as well as just the status quo, right? Sometimes the status quo is not acceptable. Critical linkages between informal networks and formal systems. They are related but different. And so when you're working in communities, you want to encourage the people with whom you're working to leverage both of these networks, right? So not only, so let's just say you've got someone at the table who has an early childhood education center. Well, they've got their formal network, right? They've got the parents of the children that they're providing care for. They've got their staff, but then they also have informal networks. So they have friends in the community. They have organizations that they belong to that are, not organizations. They have loose groups of friends. They might, all be parents of children that are on a ski team or play hockey. Those aren't really the formal networks, because those are the kids. It's much more and informal. There's no organization around that. So I'm just going to briefly go here. Well, actually, I think I'm right on time here. So key approaches to doing this. Leadership and partnership are key. Flattening that hierarchy, I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. And it is, if you have seen people who go into meetings with community members with their title and status in tow, it's an easy predictor of failure. Humility is just absolutely critical. Know what you bring, but also know that you don't know a lot about what's happening there. These are, results versus activities. You can be busy without being productive. It's really, we all know people who are busy, but who are not productive. One of the skills that you'll learn in graduate school is to identify leverage points, right? So your theories should really help you understand where opportunities for intervention are in this process. And when I say intervention, it doesn't have to be a formal program. It can be a conversation with these key stakeholders. You want to be proactive, but you don't want to usurp the local leadership. Understanding the local leadership and the local context is absolutely how you succeed. Build them up, help them understand their own expertise. When you're working with students, as graduate students, when you're working with undergrads, you're always mentoring them. You're always trying to help them understand what they know, build them up more. And, same with working with young children, right? We're always, and don't treat them like young children, but scaffold them, right? Build on their skills, move them through the zone of proximal development. Vygotsky isn't just a child development theory, it's a human development theory. And you always want to be able to have tangible outcomes, and our activity will really help with that. And then finally, you want to lead by example, right? You're part of the conversation, but not the conversation. I talk a lot. When I'm working with communities, I listen a lot. It can be very uncomfortable for an extrovert like me, but it is absolutely critical. You want to help. You don't want to drive. You want to help. And then these last few, those last three, and then I'll move on to our activity, are to always remember to praise in public and criticize in private. You do not want to embarrass anyone at the table, even if you know what they're doing is an issue. You can have that conversation after your group meeting so that there's not you don't want to disrupt those things. Recognizing what you don't know is the hardest thing, but the most important in my view. And then when you're working in communities that are not your home community, you need cultural ambassadors. And we're going to do a little bit of discussion